In the darkest years of the Cold War, while missiles sat primed and spies slipped through shadows, a stranger war was being fought behind closed doors. A war not of bullets or bombs, but of minds. This was the frontier no one saw coming. A classified program buried within the military intelligence. A team of psychics, soldiers, and scientists tasked with doing the impossible: to see across oceans, peer behind enemy lines, and gather intelligence using only the power of thought. They called it Project Stargate. At first glance, it sounds like science fiction. Remote viewing, psychic spies, mind-to-mind communication. But this wasn't a Hollywood script. This was real. Funded by the CIA, backed by the Department of Defense, and kept secret for decades. Its mission: to explore the limits of human consciousness, to turn thought into a weapon, and to use the human mind as a tool of war. Some say it was a waste of taxpayer dollars. Others say it was one of the most daring experiments in intelligence history. But one thing is certain: when the government opens the door to the unknown, it doesn't always close it behind them. This is the true story of spies who stared into the dark, and sometimes something stared back. Welcome to Project Stargate.
Welcome to the Retrospect podcast, a show where people come together from different walks of life and discuss a topic from their generation's perspective. My name is Ian, and as always, I'm joined by Jason.
Hello, everyone.
And Stoney.
Hello.
We're talking about something
Technically,
big. Uh-oh.
there was a movie about it, Men Who Stare at Goats. And it was based off of this, and it was funny. But it was also First Earth Battalion and Project Stargate, and that Men Who Stare at Goats was it George Clooney?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that movie was based off of these projects.
Right, I think
but
I remember.
with a little theatrical license
right,
also.
I think, yeah, from what I do remember doing when I was doing research for this episode.
I thought it was MK Ultra was that one.
Well, it was like, yeah, they mentioned about some movies or a movie that was made regarding this, and it was kind of goofy and
right.
Didn't really, I think, do the project justice. But, when you're dealing with a topic like this, it's, to most people, this would be crazy.
Right.
I mean, let's
Right.
just be honest. I mean, most people would look at this stuff and go, yeah, okay, whatever.
Right.
But, I didn't realize just how involved
Yeah.
our government and in essence, what is probably most important to people, our tax dollars
yeah.
that were being used to fund this. And just to kind of provide an opening here of what was Project Stargate. And I just kind of have a basic, that way our audience has an idea of what they were trying to do.
Right.
He said, Project Stargate was a U.S. Army designed to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena, particularly remote viewing in military and intelligence applications. Its primary goal was to determine whether individuals could use extrasensory perception, we know that as ESP, to gather information about distant or unseen targets. In more formal terms, Stargate was categorized under anomalous mental phenomena research, and it aimed to assess whether psychic functioning could be used operationally for tasks like locating hostages, gathering intelligence on enemy facilities, tracking lost aircraft or ships, and detecting threats like weapons or hidden bunkers. So that just kind of gives you what this whole thing was about.
Right.
And yes,
And what year was all that taking place again?
78 was when it's Project
it was
Stargate started.
72 to 95.
I got 78.
1972 is when it started, and it ended in 1995.
Which is crazy that
It was in Fort Meade, Maryland.
It was in Fort Meade, Maryland, and the program didn't start off as Stargate. There was a lot of other iterations of the program, and
it's probably still operating today under another iteration.
Like for the names I found of it, the first designation for this program was Scanate.
Oh, see, First Earth Battalion by Lieutenant Colonel Jim Calhoun was the first iteration of this.
Well, that's what it may be. These are the ones I picked: was Scanate, then Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Center Lane,
got those.
Dragoon Absorbed,
man, what the heck?
Project CF, Sunstreak, and then eventually Stargate. So it is kind of going through several iterations till it finally settled on its most popular and what it's known by now. And look, the only reason we know anything about this program is because the CIA lost a 3-year lawsuit to a nonprofit news entity called Moonrock or Muckrock. I'm sorry. And they've released about 13 million pages of classified documents. So most of the information that we have about this program comes from those documents that we released. Now, there are some redactions in there from my understanding. And there and there are still
right?
there are still some that are hidden away also. But I mean, I know in our Western mind that we've kind of lost the ability to allow for mysticism in our culture. And I've kind of thought about that, and I think about that on a lot of different levels. On our heavy emphasis on the hard sciences. I even religiously, I think of the changes in Vatican II, when a lot of what I would call the mysticism of Catholicism was kind of taken out, and now it reduced it to some level where it was a little bit more basic, so to speak. I think there's been a move in the West to really kind of kick out these things,
mysticism and holistic views,
all that.
But think about when this was coming out. We're talking about the 70s, early 70s, late 70s.
And
psychedelic drugs,
80s, apparently.
Psychedelic drug. Well, that's when it started. When it started coming out was the 60s and early 70s with all the psychedelic drugs.
Yep.
People were looking into the mystic. They were looking into those things.
That's what started the kind of the
That's right. And then
rebirth of that.
And then all of a sudden, bam, we get the 80s and the 90s, and everybody's walking away from that now because we're shocked at all the things we did in the 70s.
Yeah.
Thank God there was no cameras back then, because I'm saying,
Well, it's funny.
Sound guilty.
I'm just saying. Thank you for no cell phones.
It is. I would, matter of fact, in reading, kind of going over the final evaluative report that was put out in 95, which basically led to the CIA shutting down Stargate. There were changes. What I picked up a lot was the CIA was in a different place at that time versus now we know better, and they were kind of crazy back then, but now we're kind of we're kind of beyond all that, and on and on and on, which I'll be honest with you, it's amazing of some of the findings that this program, I should say, the number of successes,
right,
Well, there were successes. That's
the number of
in the-
successes were beyond what I would call it was beyond randomness. There was something. There was something. There was an anomaly there that something was happening. And I don't know. Did y'all watch any videos on Joe McMonagle?
No, but he did pop up on
He-
some of the
he-
stuff here.
he
yeah.
was- he
I
was-
got some stuff on him.
Yeah, he was a great video. I watched about a 6-hour interview with him on the Sean Ryan show. He's a big podcaster.
Yeah.
Had him on. He was actually 001,
Right.
and he
Wow.
worked directly for the Pentagon. Matter of fact, he was rewarded, I believe, with the Legion of Valor by the Army, which is probably the highest medal that the Army gives.
Yeah.
And it really goes back to his days in Vietnam, where he says where he kind of started perfecting this stuff.
Psychedelic drugs.
Well,
I'm just saying.
I mean, whether he took psychedelics, I don't know, but he was able to do some things, and just some of the successes of this program. One of them that really jumped out at me, because I remember going and watched the movie, was The Hunt for Red October.
Yeah.
That was a
good
great movie.
Remember that submarine he found
Really?
before it even launched. He was able to locate and let our government know the Soviets were fixing to launch this new, which at that time was the largest submarine in the world,
Right.
which is just incredible.
Yeah.
So this program over its, I guess, 23 years.
Yeah.
I think the CIA, I saw a figure of about 20 million they spent on that program, which
Which feels like nothing
That's
nowadays.
nothing. That's nothing.
in the scope of the DoD
Yeah.
budget.
Doge isn't even looking at that right now.
No.
I'm just saying.
But yeah, I mean, I just kind of picking up on some of, I think there was just some reluctance. Their funding was approved every year. So they were never given funding for like 5 years. It was, they had to go to Congress every year to get a reappropriation to keep this Project Stargate going.
Yeah.
Which to me is amazing that it went 23 years.
That's crazy.
Having to go every year to Congress to basically tell.
Well, it's also like you said, like the fact that they're able to probably bring some merit to what they're doing probably helped. I think that a lot.
Well, I mean, you have to think in the 70s. I think people were a little bit more open now. In the 70s, you're at the height of the Cold War. They come to find out that Soviets were spending a tremendous amount of money on their own parapsychological research. I've got numbers in the early 70s. They were spending about 60,000 rubles per year. By 75, they were spending 300 million rubles a year. Now I don't know what the conversion that would have been back in that time,
Right.
But you
the
can
same-
see the Soviets believed in this program. Obviously,
History repeats itself, and it's the parallel right now with AI. Like we're at an arms race right now with China for having the best AI, and it's just some things never change. But yeah, it's interesting to see that that's one. All it takes is the quote unquote the enemy to start digging around and trying to find something. We'll be like, oh, well, we gotta.
Well, you would have to think their own remote viewers must have had success against us,
right? Enough to light a fire underneath us.
They were actually studying this back into the 20s.
Crazy.
So you kind of listen to a few people talk on this. I believe their culture is a little bit more open to mysticism and is not as foreign in their kind of their lexicon. So I think they were more open in this, saying, I can easily see that the mind can do things that maybe we don't know. I've always said that I think in many ways
more willing to drop money on it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're looking for any way to get over the United States at that time. So yeah, if the United States was doing this, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, there's, I mean, I don't care what you're hiding, I'm going to find it.
Right.
And I don't even have to go to your country to find it.
Crazy.
I can just sit in my room.
You're right. And it feels out of this world. It feels a bit.
I mean, matter of fact, I know I copied this quote from, at the time, in 1977, a North Carolina Congressman, Charlie Rose, talking with reps from every state, said, "It seems to me remote viewing would be a hell of a cheap radar system. And if the Russians have it and we don't, we're in serious trouble." So obviously this stuff was very much a part of kind of the everyday, lingo of what's going on in Congress about this program, because I imagine definitely certain people in Congress probably very well aware of it.
Right, yeah.
So, hey, I mean, it can be absolutely
part of the even the closing down of the program was highly kind of sketch.
Right.
Because they had a panel. And this panel consisted of people like Ray Hyman, who had previously completely criticized remote viewing. And the last director, Dr. Edwin May, said that it's like Jason said, every year you have to go get your funding. So the only way you can do that is to show your successes. We've done this, we found this submarine, we've done this, we made this goat faint, we did this, and this. And so when this panel, they say, only looked at the last 2 or 3 months of the program and ignored over 10 years of successes. And I love his quote. He said, "They looked only at the final few months of the program. That's like judging the NBA team by their last 2 games." So were they just trying? I think they were just trying to close it down to move it to something else.
Right.
A little more clandestine, a little more hidden, because like you said, the CIA's having to pump all these documents out.
Yeah.
They're having to do all of this stuff.
Change the name, give a new code of pay.
Hey, but if we bring it over here, we can put more funding into it and nobody will know.
Well, I will tell from what I found that the CIA was, believe it or not, they were questioned about this in 2021.
Really?
Yeah.
They're being questioned about it again because more documents are coming out with the Trump declassification
and
thing.
Basically, they said the assessment of the CIA officers involved in the program during the 70s was that enough accurate remote viewing experiences existed to defy randomness. They further indicated from very early in CIA's history, they have been interested in investigating whether extrasensory perception, ESP, or other paranormal phenomenon, generally called parapsychology, exists, and if so, whether they had operational uses for intelligence. And actually, the earliest record they have in their in the CIA's history was a memorandum in 1948 where they were speculating on whether hypnotized people could be used for long-distance communication. So the CIA has been involved in, some people would consider kook stuff. I mean,
they've been doing that from sleep deprivation, LSD, and everything else.
Am I not mistaken? I don't remember all the details on MK Ultra, but wasn't it like the MK
using
Ultra
mind-altering drugs? And
Yeah,
basically, they a lot of unsuspecting Americans and Canadians were. Yeah, they
That's what
were.
I thought. Okay.
I think the CIA by '95 was really trying to distance itself from some of these kind of programs. I mean, you think, okay, 95, the Cold War is over. We're transitioning into a new type of world. Now there's no more big bad Soviet Union over there on the other side with all their missiles pointing at us. We're the top dog now.
Right.
Period. There ain't nobody can touch us. So I think, unfortunately, circumstances force you to change.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas maybe when you're in a more kind of a contentious situation, maybe you're more willing to kind of push boundaries on what you're willing to do to possibly get an edge.
But it was also becoming very politically risky. And so maybe it just got buried behind corporate NDAs and black budgets.
Well, I mean,
it was becoming extremely risky. And like we were talking about, the culture of America was changing away from this mystic stuff into something else.
Yeah, I think the kind of the fruit of the '60s generation with psychedelics and just the exploration of the mind. By the time you get into '90s, I think a lot of that had kind of dried up.
Well, it was pot and cocaine in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, they left the psychedelics behind. Even heroin wasn't the most. Now, heroin subsequently in the 2000s, whatever I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You don't have to edit that
No,
out.
you're good.
I'm stupid.
Yeah.
But heroin's making a comeback, but even heroin had died off.
Right. And along those same lines, I think you're starting to see a resurgence back of psychedelics.
Yes,
I
do
more
too.
and more
Yes, that's
people
what
are
I'm saying.
talking
Yes.
about it now, and so
I've heard a lot
it's
about
just kind of
mushrooms.
the cycle goes up and down. I mean, there's times when
How many times have we said on the show? There's a big pendulum.
Yeah.
And that pendulum swings, and it's coming back the other way. So.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think there's now a big push on esoteric type topics. I especially think now with the podcast world and stuff like that, and you've gotten away from just standard media. And I think you're now seeing a lot of these topics being talked about, whereas before the media just didn't pay them any mind because they had X amount.
They weren't getting paid to do that.
They weren't getting paid to do that. So I think it was an incredible attempt to look at pushing the boundaries of our reality. And I've always said I believe that we have not really understood our own reality here. I think we've all heard that we only use X% of our brain.
Right.
We've all heard that. Now the question is, how do you measure that? I don't know. I'm sure there's some tests to, he's only using 20% of the brain, or 40%.
I don't think anybody's used 20. I think we're down to 10 to 12%.
Yeah,
is
so
the
that's what I'm
average
saying.
person,
So the question is how do you unlock that other part of the brain, if it can do? And obviously, reading about Project Stargate, it appears that the practices were something that could be learned. That it was something that wasn't just something that there were some people who were better at it, but everybody had the potential to do it, which really perked the interest of the government in this. Matter of fact, some of the first people involved in this program was a Dr. Harold Putoff. He was a PhD in electrical engineering. His specialty was key specialties, quantum electronics, and zero-point energy. And then another guy by the name of Russell Targ. He was not a professor. He had his own interests. I didn't quite remember exactly what it was, but he was not, I don't think he was a professional academic.
Well, he was mostly into ESP and non-logical consciousness.
Okay.
Non-local consciousness.
Right. So he was
kind of into the mind thing, and
stuff.
him and Putoff kind of worked very
right.
well
And
together.
I believe it was at the Stanford Research Institute. And so I think that's where they got started in starting this program. And then, of course, their famous really guy that came on was, I think, a last name of Rice. Do y'all remember a guy by the name of Rice? He was a former police officer.
Yes.
From Burbank, I believe it was Burbank, California. I believe he was a former police commissioner. Pat Rice. Right. He was like the first guy that they brought on. He was an incredible remote viewer.
He was also, oddly enough, a Scientologist.
Yeah, he was.
Yes.
Who now Putoff was. Right.
No, Rice was.
Rice was,
yes.
Okay, because I know Dr. Harold Putoff was also a huge figure in the Scientology world. Matter of fact, he had risen to the very top in it, but he abandoned it after he got involved with projects, eventually Project Stargate.
Now,
Ego Swan was another.
Pat Price died mysteriously in 1975 under unusual circumstances in Las Vegas.
Heart attack, wasn't it?
And they say some claim it was the CIA or KGB involvement because some of the things he saw were way too accurate.
Uh-oh.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There was very few people that were as good as Pat. Was it Pat Rice?
Price.
Right? Pat Price.
Well, he was a legend in the community.
Yeah, he was.
They believed his work in remote viewing was real.
Oh yeah. He had a lot of success. Ego Swan was the guy that came on. Also, matter of fact, Ego Swan designed the foundational remote viewing techniques that are actually still used today. Because there are some private entities that are
CRV, coordinate remote viewing.
Yeah, that they were.
And Pat Putoff, or however you say Putoff.
Right, yeah, because some of these guys left Project Stargate. I know you mentioned Edwin May. I actually watched an interview with Ed May. It was very good and he talked about the program, the history of it. And matter of fact, they are still, all of the people that were involved with Stargate, even today, very much believed in the success of that program, and it actually worked.
Well, Swan, one of his big feats was that he saw Jupiter before NASA's Pioneer 10 flyby. And allegedly, he was describing the rings and weather patterns that were later confirmed by the spacecraft. And he was extremely accurate.
Yeah. But see, that's the deal. Because I know, listening to Ed May, they'll say that Joe McMonagle, he was also a guy that basically had was very much up there with Pat Price. Matter of fact, he may have even been more. But he did a remote viewing, and of course, Ed May basically said you can't make that kind of prediction, but he basically did a remote viewing on Mars, and supposedly picked up remnants of an ancient civilization.
Right. Well, Swan had said he viewed alien structures on the moon, and he kind of detailed this later in his book, Penetration, but he saw alien stuff on the moon. So these guys were, and this guy, he is noted as the father of remote viewing. And he continues to influence New Age thinkers and psychic communities because he was kind of the father to it.
Yeah.
He kind of brought all this, and I'm talking about Ego Swan.
Yeah, Ego Swan was. He was definitely he was up there as far as his contributions to this specialty, and I'll be very curious. Right now, there is an institute. I don't know if y'all read, it was the Monroe Institute.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Okay, well, that's what they do. This is what they do. Matter of fact, Joe McMonagle is one of the board of directors, I believe, for that. But
it's probably like a month or so ago, I listened to a podcast about the Monroe Institute. It went into all kinds of detail.
Well, they do other than remote viewing. I mean, I think they do like astral projection and telekinesis. And
I forgot the name of the guy who started it, but he did that whole process where he would like go to sleep and then would have these like out of body experiences and could control this spirit form or whatever.
Exactly. So. It's so funny. They're trying to give an explanation of how this works.
Yeah.
And guess what? Things I was kind of picking up, like this universal consciousness. The Akashic record. All this stuff. This kind of this data bank in the sky, so to speak.
Right.
I kind of picked up a little bit of that when I was doing some research on this, and. As I said, some people were better at it than others. And I think ultimately why the CIA canceled this, it wasn't that they didn't have success.
I think they were afraid what would happen to the public if they accepted psychic spying as real? I think that was one of their top reasons for getting rid
Well,
of this. Because remember, we're out of the mystic arena. Now we're coming into the 2000s, and we're totally against that kind of stuff. What would that do to the public? What would that do to the American people if all of a sudden we realized psychic spying was real? Well, obviously we don't need to be putting in $100 billion every year to the CIA or how much ever we spend to do this shit, right?
I think what I picked up based on that last report, and I right now the name of the report that came out in 1995 that basically the evaluation was not that they didn't have some success. They did, because it's documented. You have 23 years of research. It is documented they found things through this technique.
Yeah.
I think it was the unreliability of it.
Right.
Because the problem is in a laboratory, you're not having to worry about kind of life and death, so to speak, whereas maybe in a tense situation where the data has to be correct or lives are lost.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem with it. It wasn't.
It's not a science; it's an art, is what it feels like.
Yeah, it wasn't something that they could 100% rely on to find what they were trying to find and it work at that given moment when they needed it to work. And I think that was the problem.
Something that is like fundamentally based on like human feelings is not something that's going to go very well in a super scientific or something that needs, like you said, outcomes, like hard outcomes. When it's all up to like human emotion, it's like, oh, that doesn't really.
I mean, I know listening
up.
to Joe McMonagle when on his interview on the Sean Ryan show, he was telling about a missing persons case that he was called by the local sheriff. There was a little boy missing, and he basically told the deputy to go down this road, get out of your car, walk X amount of steps in this direction, call out his name, he'll hear your voice.
Dang.
And guess what?
That's exactly
what happened. I mean, to me, that just blows my mind. Yeah. How do you know that? I mean, so there's got to be something to this. You just don't randomly just, just walk out there and walk so far and, and call out the name and the kid will be... Yeah, come on.
Right.
Yeah, really?
Well, you were talking about earlier this lawsuit. And that was, I think, around 2003, I think it was.
2017, they lost.
Well, then there was another lawsuit in 2003 where they released 13,000 pages of stuff. And these sessions had transcripts, viewing sessions, operational notes, and debriefs for possible non-human entities, underground facilities, and even Mars-related targets.
Yeah, when people were saying they were doing remote viewings out in space.
Oh, yeah.
You can only imagine what's
then
going on.
It starts to get really into the crazy realm at that point.
Yeah.
It's one that I feel like there's a suspension of disbelief for like being able to like have like a spirit or like have some sort of like otherworldly spiritual aspect on Earth, but once you start dealing with things that are,
if I may,
forever,
when we had X-Man on, we talked about maybe they weren't traveling at the speed of light. We were talking about a conscience-powered thing.
I'm just talking
what
about
if it is all conscious? What if that is possible through? If we can, they can power a conscious-powered ship to go across, the universe. Mm-hmm. Maybe we're just at the early stages if we're looking at,
I'm just talking about the perception of it. I was like, for me, I can realistically put myself in that context back in late 80s, early 90s, and be like, I believe in the spiritual nature of things. I believe that probably somebody could realistically, if I allow myself to believe in ghosts or an afterlife or God or whatever, and I could allow myself to think that you could somehow spiritually, through the connection of other human beings, I could suspend my disbelief enough to believe that you could probably do something like that. Mm-hmm. But I could also see at the same time you try and tell somebody like that in that period of time. I also saw things on Mars. even I would be like, well, personally, I
Can
believe.
you share what you've been doing?
Yeah, exactly right. Because then it starts to get kind of, for me, that's when it starts
It's
stepping
called
crazy.
puff pass. I'm
They,
just saying.
they were. I mean, Joe McMonagle. In his interview, he mentioned a few names of people who were really good, and I believe another name that he mentioned was a lady by the name of Angela Ford. Was another name, if I'm remembering her name right. But she was also interviewed by the same guy that I listened on with Joe on the Sean Ryan show. He interviewed a number of people.
Right.
Looks like back to back that were associated with Project Stargate, and Angela Ford was also a very prominent person. Was very successful, and when I say successful, I think the term was where it would go beyond just a statistical chance of randomness, which I think was just under 50%.
Wow.
Well, she worked for DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and she was in Project Stargate.
Yeah.
But she's kind of been overlooked.
Right.
But I think it was possibly because of her success, too.
Well, I find it, and this was kind of a very awkward moment in the interview, but I believe Sean asked her, have you gone back in the past?
Mm.
And I think he brought up something to the effect of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ.
Really?
And she had a very uneasy look on her face, and she refused to answer.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Weird.
He goes, you want to talk about it? And she was just shaking her head. So found that interesting.
Yeah.
Well, she a customs agent had disappeared, had left and fled the country.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that when she did her remote viewing, you will see something like Lowell, Wyoming.
Yeah.
And they found him in Lovell, Wyoming, which is just off by one letter, but maybe, you could kind of see that a little differently.
Look, one of the big things that were found, I'm sure y'all read this, was it Skylab?
Mm-hmm.
When Skylab was coming back in, had a decaying orbit, and they were, at that time, they had no way of knowing where this thing was going to land, whether it was going to drop, suitcase or refrigerator sized pieces on people's houses and stuff.
Yeah.
They had they got with Joe McMonagle on this. He basically narrowed it down to an area in Australia, about a 60-mile area in Australia. He missed it by it was a small amount.
That's crazy.
But can you imagine that you're just randomly, I think it's going to be coming down over this area, over a X amount of mile area in the desert of Australia.
Well, just think if he had just said Australia, and you'd have been, oh wow, how did he know that?
Yeah.
But you're going to bitch and moan about 20 miles that he was off.
That's what I'm saying. It was incredible. I was listening to that. I said, "You've got to be kidding me!" So this goes, yeah. So obviously he was very gifted, and it's very interesting of his past and where he came from and his upbringing, and it just, obviously he had a gift, and for whatever reason, he was very successful in finding things and letting people know about things that were going to happen.
Right.
So I thought that was a biggie. He also put out a book too.
Yeah.
Well, they all have.
They've
been doing lectures and talks.
And Bill, if I would have had more time, a lot of these people that really do, I listened to a couple podcasts regarding this topic.
Yeah.
And they took months to investigate and really put together, their material. So it was a wealth of information on some of this stuff. And some of these things are 3 and 4 hours long.
Oh, yeah.
So I urge people to look into this stuff and read about it, and don't just kind of, kick it to the curb, or, kind of close your mind off to it, because obviously our own government believed that it worked
for 20-something years.
For 20-something years.
And possibly still today, just in the back doors.
Possibly today they're still doing this. So
in some way, yeah.
It kind of reminds me of a little bit, there was another, I don't know if there's anything connecting the CIA to it, but there was another movie that came out called The Atticus Institute. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I haven't seen that one.
But it is the actual, supposedly the government study of possession.
Wow.
And it is the only case that the government documented possession. Check it out.
What is it called again?
It's called the Atticus Institute.
Okay.
It's very disturbing.
I bet.
But this kind of reminds me of probably, it looks like it kind of happened about the same era.
Right.
That this is going on. So, you got MK Ultra, you got Project Stargate, you got the
MJ-12.
You got that one. You've got the Gateway Experience, I believe, is another one. A lot of these things that I give the CIA credit. If it's somehow it can be utilized as it can be weaponized, it can be used to gather information.
Right.
They're willing to go there.
Oh yeah. They're going to spend some money on it.
They're going to spend some money on it. So, it's kind of, I don't know, where a lot of people like to just kind of, I know people kind of like the way the world, they've got their little world kind of packed in a certain way, and the puzzle is put together in a certain way, and I'm comfortable with that, and I don't want to venture beyond those boundaries because the whole thing may fall apart on me.
Of course.
And my whole worldview might completely collapse. So I think this kind of goes in line with some of our other topics we've talked about. I mean, Nikola Tesla, what did he believe in? And, kind of this universal consciousness, this, data bank of knowledge, the other guy, the guy that founded Port Arthur. Was it Arthur Stillwell?
Yeah.
Yes,
Arthur
Stillwell. Yep.
I kind of put him in there. Edgar Casey.
Yeah.
Same.
I forgot about that.
Same thing, that these people seem to have something going on with them.
Right. Or some connection to something.
Some connection to something that gives them some view that, kind of the third eye.
Right.
I think they kind of mentioned the mind as the third eye.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, this stuff has been I have to say, I've enjoyed every moment researching this topic because I just couldn't get enough of it. I just was going on and just kind of diving into some of this stuff. And as I said, just if anybody's interested, as I said, mentioned earlier, that where most of the information comes from now that we know of Project Stargate was a result of this 2017 lawsuit, the CIA loss. It's called the Crest Archive, and it's named after, I believe, the first project officer of Project Stargate was Dr. Kenneth A. Crest.
Wow.
So all that data, they call it the Crest Archive. So this is basically 20-some years of data that's just been, classified documents. And
it also makes me think a little bit, too, of like what is currently being hidden right now that we'll probably find by happenstance.
There's probably a lot of stuff.
A couple decades,
I mean, look, they just released they just made public the new SR-2 or whatever it is, a new Blackbird.
Right.
SR-71 Sun.
The new one, and it's supposed to be just like I can't even think what the speeds. I think it gets faster than the speed of sound.
It's definitely faster than the speed of sound
so
by a couple of them.
I think it's Mach. I forget what you may want to look it up with the new SR-72 Blackbird. it can do. But these are projects that are hidden or denied until eventually they release them. Like just like
it says the SR-72 Dark Star is a concept for a hypersonic aircraft, successor to the SR-71 Blackbird. So the Dark Star is developed by Lockheed Martin. It says it is designed as an unmanned, reusable aircraft capable of operating at Mach 6+.
6+.
Yeah,
4,600 miles per hour.
Yeah, making it significantly faster than the SR-71. The Dark Star purpose is to conduct intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions.
Almost twice as fast as the SR-71.
Dang, dude.
I can't even imagine flying.
Well, they've known for decades and decades that the human was stopping any faster speed because
our bodies
couldn't handle it.
The weakest link.
But now, if it's unmanned,
it also can go to an altitude of 85,000 feet.
Yeah, I think it hugs. It can hug literally the upper atmosphere where it touches space.
Crazy, dude.
So, we've all heard. We heard about UFO technology and trying to understand how this technology is powered. There's been talk that this technology actually is driven by consciousness and thought, which is faster than the speed of light. So if you think about that, if you can develop a piece of technology that you can control by thought.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be, how that would look. Then I can see how some of these technologies where people have seen these objects in the sky literally go 90 degrees.
Yeah.
Instantaneously. The only way you could do that is a combination of anti-grav tech. Oh, by the way, our government has finally said that they have anti-grav tech.
Really?
Oh, yes.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, you didn't see the news? No. The news, I think I forwarded to you guys. It's possible that might be a possible podcast episode. Yeah. What did they say? I've got it back here. White House says it has tech that can manipulate time and space.
Get out.
Yes, I saw that the other day. Yeah.
I must have missed that one. Oh
and not only that, now there's talk that the actual Malaysian flight that they've never found.
Yeah.
This was a test.
Stop.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying that's what's floating out there.
All right.
Yeah. They warped time and space and made it disappear.
That's crazy.
Well, the Philadelphia experiment, was it the destroyer that had all that stuff happen?
You don't think they stopped experimenting with?
No, not at
all.
Nuh-uh.
Some people say it never happened. Some people say it did. I don't know. It's, to me, you got people that supposedly are welded into the metal after this thing disappeared and came back. Yeah, they supposedly they showed people coming back on board and seeing guys like their bodies are fused
into
the ship.
Yeah.
Because
that would be a good movie for your show, your other podcast, actually. Yeah.
There's a couple things there, but some people say it was all BS, and no, the ship was never disappeared. Some say, who knows? But I'm just saying, all of these things that Stargate talks about. This is what I'm talking about. This consciousness, how consciousness, and you're going to see it. As we talked about transhumanism last episode.
Yep.
What the marriage of biology and nanotech.
Yep.
And
consciousness into machines.
We've had our buddy Brandon on a number of times talking about nanotech and wetware and everything else.
So I'm a firm believer that, believe me, there are other countries that are doing this stuff also. But
what about countries like China who believe in mysticism?
Well, they probably are doing it too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They believe in it more than us.
Right. Oh yeah,
the monks, the Buddhists, all of these things, they believe in this mysticism.
right. Exactly.
We're fighting it tooth and nail.
Yeah, well,
but they
somehow,
that's part of their culture.
Right. It's somehow in the West we've lost the ability, what I would call we've lost our imagination in many ways. We have
That's part of the educational system.
We've lost our imagination, and that for people who I think exhibit that, I think in some ways they're criticized, they're made fun of, they're kind of denigrated a little bit. You're crazy, beyond anything that I can't prove under a microscope or under a certain regimented supposed
Right.
then it's not real. I think what Project Stargate has shown that we really don't know much at all.
Yeah.
We're really on the tip of the iceberg of really what is capable of what we are really truly capable of. I've always firmly believed that we have yet to experience our full potential as human beings.
Right.
What it's going to take for us to kind of break free and to be able to embrace some of this stuff and not, because I'm going to tell you, some of the criticisms in Congress at the time, which was so hard for them going every year to get funding, you had some congressmen basically saying that's the devil's work. So you're fighting a good bit of the population. Then the minute you bring this up, oh, that's all the devil doing that. Well, I mean, we don't know if it is or it is or isn't.
Right.
We don't know that. But, I mean, does the devil want people to go find missing people? And to me, the idea of that is a little simplistic, I think, kind of a
gray area.
It's a gray area. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying, I'm a firm believer that sometimes you can tap into things that opens doors, and we don't know what doors we're opening, and sometimes we don't know how to close them properly,
Right.
and things come
AI
and things come out. So come out on the other end, but it appears in this case. I didn't really pick up any of that. As I said, there were a lot of failures too. They were not always correct.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said too, is like once you start shaking up the narrative, once you start like bending people's worldview, they start getting really defensive. They start saying things, once you get just a little bit outside, or once you get a little bit into the fringe, they're like, oh, that's, no.
Well, think about this. The ultimate goal was not to see if they had a submarine coming out of a base. The ultimate goal was to be able to kill somebody remotely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
that
you're
was
right.
the ultimate goal.
We haven't brought that up, but that's true.
And I got some stuff on that one. But that's what I was trying to say earlier. What would the populace think if all of a sudden there's a little base in Colorado somewhere, and you got 10 or 15 people sitting around killing people all the time?
Crazy.
Who's to say they're not going to kill me?
Yeah.
What happens if the Biden crime family decided to use that to take out a presidential candidate?
Right.
What is the American public going to think about that? So that's why it's got buried deep behind this door, behind that door, behind that door, because that was the ultimate goal.
Right.
Not just being able to move one object from here to there, or being able to see this, or being able to see what's on Mars. They wanted to be able to kill people remotely, because then how do you prove who it was?
You would never be able to prove it.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, you would never, the way our current jurisprudence works, there'd be no way to even.
Yeah, no.
Because
especially if it's by.
Once again, I said our culture doesn't want to go there.
Right.
It's not there. So,
especially if you're able to make it look like a heart attack, you're able to make it look like some kind of just like quote unquote natural.
Well, I mean, I sometimes
occurrence.
wonder with Price, his heart attack. I sometimes wonder, was that caused by someone on the other side reaching out,
poking around,
and taking him out?
Yeah,
I mean, maybe so.
Who knows?
That I'm not discounting anything.
No,
right.
I don't think we can.
I think he was like 57 when he.
Yeah, he wasn't that old.
He wasn't old.
No, he was not
Right.
that old.
That doesn't necessarily mean anything, but I mean, I'm just saying it's
even further into the crazy.
Sketchy.
Like you get, is it like once you start once you start allowing the idea for that, it starts to get into like the crazy territory a little bit, where you're like, it's a slippery slope. Because now if that's a thing you're capable of doing, then it's like, well, I mean, who's to say? Then it starts to put into question a lot of like, quote unquote, natural occurrences, like or things that feel random. It's like, was it random or was it all like a
I don't.
Like I said, slippery slope. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of this stuff was just outright.
Yeah.
And look, and what surprised me, even now, they're still being questioned.
Of course.
About Project Stargate. And I'm sure they're being...
2017 was not a long time ago.
No!
Because of the successes is why they're still being questioned.
Oh, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
if there was one success, somebody's going to want to know about it, and can we manipulate that?
As I said, the people that were involved in that program are still very much believe that remote viewing is a thing and it works. And it's a technique that can be learned.
Right.
Anybody can do it, which to me would be fascinating. To be honest, they said there's a test you can take. I may even try to look into that and see about just trying it.
Of course. It'd be
just
fun.
To see what look. If I find it, I'll let everybody know what I.
Yeah,
Jason, the psychic warrior.
The psychic warrior.
Next time we come to sit down and record, Jason's like, "That was a really good dinner you made last night." And I was like, "What are you talking about?"
Hey, does your girlfriend know you went there?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man. Should you really have not gone to the gym?
But yeah, I mean, this like this Monroe Institute. I was kind of went to their website and looked at their stuff, and it's like it's pretty interesting, actually. And then they got a couple other private think tanks. I think Edwin May, I believe he's at least the last I saw. I think he's got private funding from this Portuguese or.
Yeah,
Portugal pharmaceutical company that basically kind of doing some of the same stuff.
Right.
But a lot of these guys. I mean, I know Ego Swan is passed. He passed away in 2013. But Joe McMonagle, he's still doing interviews. I highly recommend anybody that's curious about this go and Google Project Stargate and YouTube and just pull up all the stuff.
Right.
Another podcast. I like plugging these guys because they do some good work. It's Mr. Mythos, I believe, is another one.
Mm-hmm.
Did a really good job. He did a 2-part on this topic.
Wow.
Very, very thorough and very, very good. So if you really want to really get into the weeds with this stuff, you can do it. I mean, as I said, and we try to provide what we call a 10,000-foot view of these topics,
right?
To let people know, look, this stuff is out there, and it's pretty interesting if you take a look at it, and go find this stuff, and maybe, just maybe, you might change your mind on some of these things,
right?
Or at least maybe be more open to it.
Yeah.
So.
But beware, though. It's probably some of these are a slippery slope. So
it's definitely going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, once you get in there, you could be.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I'm just saying it can open up your. If you really allow it,
maybe it'll open up your consciousness.
Maybe.
Well, right now, I some of the things I've been reading here is about this. You talked about the a new consciousness is rising. What was the the Mayan calendar and representing a new age, a new way of thinking about things. Everybody thought it was the end of the world. It wasn't the end of the world.
Remember, 15 million Mayans disappeared overnight.
Well, I don't know what happened to them.
Yep.
Overnight.
When? Do you know when?
I used to know all that stuff. I just remember that one quote. But
they
literally disappeared overnight.
The Mayan civilization did just for whatever reason they abandoned all their cities and they left. But yeah, it's
okay. If they just left, There would have been a path. There would have been tracking. There would have been some place that they went. They disappeared literally overnight.
Yeah, I don't. That's what I'm saying. Their culture just vanished. I just don't know what happened.
And it wasn't like 10 or 15 people.
Right.
No, it definitely something happened. But yeah, that's what I'm talking about. This new consciousness. That's what I'm saying. You kind of get these theme of consciousness, universal consciousness. Another theme I picked up is sounds, frequencies, vibrations,
yes.
All these things that kind of it's just amazing how they're all intertwined.
Yeah,
to some degree. I just thought that was,
it's cool stuff.
It's kind of, you look at this stuff and go, maybe there is a connection.
Right.
And it's the challenge of trying to put all this stuff together, and
that's what we do.
Yeah.
So we try to bring good stuff to you all, and
Right.
and hopefully maybe this might pique your interest, and maybe doing a little digging on your own on some of this stuff, and read some books or watch some videos or whatever the case may be.
Or conjure up your own conspiracy theories and let us know what you think at getoffendedtogether@gmail.com. We also have comment sections on YouTube and Spotify where you can leave little comments there. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you can.
That really helps us out.
It really helps us out.
And
5-star
us.
reviews, all that good stuff. Until next week, thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. God bless.
Imagine this. A psychic sits in a sealed room. Across the world, a hostage is hidden. A map, a pen, a blank mind. And then the location emerges. Coordinates, shapes, details too specific to ignore. That happened, not in fiction, in the files, in the transcripts, in the now declassified fragments from Project Stargate. So the next time someone laughs about psychic spies, remember this. The military believed, the CIA invested, and you just listened to the episode they never wanted you to hear. So if that chills you even a little, share this episode, rate the show, and keep your ears open. We're not done here.